Alright, so for 39 you are finding the zeros, the real zeros. So first thing you do anytime you have to find the zeros in a polynomial is see if there's a factor you can factor out of each term. And in this case there's an x, so that leaves you with x to the fourth minus 16x squared plus 64. So now you have a trinomial right here, so three terms, one constant, and this degree is twice as big as this degree. So treat this like a quadratic, okay? And this is what I mean. Whoops. That you can think of this as x squared minus 16x squared plus 64. So here is your x squared minus 16x plus 64. So you look for factors of 64 that add up to negative 16, and that would be negative 8 and negative 8. So this would be x squared minus 8, x squared minus 8. And so you find the zeros. So you set each factor equal to 0. So x equals 0 for this one right here. And then x squared minus 8 equals 0. And you don't have to do it twice, because notice how these are the same. You don't have to do it twice, just do it once. So for the second equation here, I'm going to add 8 to both sides and take the square root. So that leaves me with x equals plus or minus square root of 8, which is plus or minus 2 square root of 2. So the zeros are 0 and plus or minus 2 radical 2. So for number 40, you have to find a polynomial with these zeros. It doesn't say anything about a, so we're going to assume that a is 1, since it doesn't say anything about it. So I'm going to set up the polynomial. Remember when you have, and then these are already conjugate pair, right? So you don't have to add the conjugate because it's already there. So when you have a 0, you always set it up as x minus that 0. So I'm going to write the first 0 and then the second 0. So now I'm going to distribute the negative. And that gets rid of the parentheses inside. And now we multiply. Okay? So you can either set up a 3 by 3 grid, which I usually do when it's a 3 by 3, when you're multiplying 3 terms by 3 terms. So x minus 2 minus radical 3, x minus 2 plus radical 3. So and then it's a multiplication chart, so it's going to be x squared negative 2x, x radical 3 minus 2x, 4 minus 2 radical 3 minus x radical 3, 2 radical 3, and minus radical 9. Okay, so notice how this one and this one are opposite, so they cancel out. And this one and this one are opposite, so they cancel out. And this one's actually a negative 3. So you combine your like terms. So you say f of x equals x squared minus 4x, and then we have the 4 minus 3, which is 1. And that's the answer. Okay, so for 41, you're finding the zeros again. So when I have 4 terms, the first thing I try is to see if it factors by grouping. And this is the way I set it up. So you just put the terms in standard form, with the highest degree in a 2 by 2 grid. Just fill in the top row, then go to the next row, Okay, and then you ask yourself, what's the greatest common factor in this row? And that would be x squared. And then you ask yourself, x squared times something gives you x cubed. So that would be x. And then x squared times something is x squared. Well, that would be 1. And finally, x times something equals negative 16x. And so that would be negative 16. And you always check the last two in like this number times this number. It should give you, when you multiply them together, it should give you this. And it does. So that means that you factored it correctly and that it does factor this way. So the two factors are x plus 1 from the top, and then x squared minus 16. Well, x squared minus 16 is x plus 4 times x minus 4, difference of squares. And so the zeros are negative 1 and then plus and minus 4. So for number 42, they're asking you to use long division. Okay, even though this one could be divided with synthetic division, I'm still going to follow the instructions because you need to know the two strategies, okay? So you ask yourself, you always look at the leading term in each one, the outside and the inside polynomial. Okay, so the divisor and the dividend, right? So I have x times something gives you 4x cubed. So that would be 4x squared. And I could put it right here, 4x squared. Then you multiply. So you multiply this times this and put the answer down here. So just like with numbers, when you did long division in grade school. And then here it's minus 12x squared. But then you subtract. When you subtract, you're adding the opposite. So this one becomes negative and this one becomes positive. Now you combine the two rows. This is 0 and this is 8x squared. You bring down the next term. Again, this is just like long division in grade school. And again, you ask yourself, x times what gives you 8x squared? So that would be 8x. You multiply 8x by x minus 3, you get 8x squared minus 24x. You subtract. When you subtract, you add the opposite. So this would be minus, and this would be plus. You combine the two rows. This is 0, and this is negative 21x. You bring down the next term. And so you ask yourself, x times what gives you negative 21x? That would be negative 21. So negative 21 times x is negative 21x. And negative 21 times negative 3 is positive 36. I'm sorry, 63. We subtract. So when we subtract, we add the opposite. So this becomes positive. And this positive here becomes negative. So when you combine the rows, this is 0. And this is negative 49. Okay? So that's your remainder, so we just write it as plus negative 49 over x minus 3. And that would be the answer up here. Okay, so now this is set up for synthetic division. We're dividing by x minus 5. So that means that the a value, because when you divide by x minus a, the a value is 5, positive 5. And if you notice, the coefficients are not in the order that I have written here. This is in standard form, where this has the highest degree, then the next one, then the next one, until the constant. So 40 is the constant that goes last. Okay, so now the procedure for for synthetic division is first you bring down that first number, you multiply the 7 by the 5, you get 35, so you put that 35 right here. You combine this column and you get -1, and then -1 times 5 is -5. You combine this third column, you get -8. -8 times 5 is -40. You combine the column and you get 0. This is your remainder. Okay? And then you count backwards starting from 8. So this would be x to the 0, x to the first, x squared. And then your answer would be 7x squared minus x minus 8. So that's the quotient. So like I said before, when you have 4 terms and you want to find the zeros, try factor by grouping first. And so when we do that here, the greatest common factor in the first row is 3x squared. Squared. And then 3x squared times something gives you 9x cubed. That would be 3x. And then 3x squared times something gives you 15x. That would be 5. And then 3x times what gives you 7x. And right off the bat, you're going to see that it doesn't make a lot of sense, because 3x times what gives you 7x would be 7/3. Right? 7/3 times 3x would give you 7x. But then when you check this number times this number, it does not give you 1, right? So you know that it doesn't factor by grouping. So when that happens, then you're left with the p's over q's. And remember, the p's are the factors of this number, the constant, which is plus or minus 1. And the q's are the factors of that number, which are plus or minus 1, plus or minus 3, plus or minus 9. So P over Q would be, you take this number over each of these numbers. So 1 over 1 is 1, and then 1/3 plus or minus, and then 1/9, again plus or minus. And then you do synthetic division with them. Now, the only numbers I wouldn't even pick are the positives, because you're looking for zeros, right? And notice how all the signs here are positive. So if you use another positive, there's no way you'll get a 0, because there are no opposites. So I'm going to only do the negatives, okay? So that'll save me a little bit of time. So I'm going to start with -1, and 9, 15, 7, and 1. Bring down the 9, -9, 6, -6, 1, -1, 0. Found it. Okay, I found this one. And so these three numbers here represent 9x squared plus 6x plus 1. So I can see that 3x plus 1 would work. 3x plus 1. And this -1 means x plus 1, because the -1 is a 0. And so when it says find all the zeros would be -1 and -1/3. This is a double 0. The multiplicity is 2, so you don't have to write it twice. So there it is.